I'm Carson Horn, and it's time for another edition of Talkin' Tumors, where I break down the latest happenings in Auburn athletics. Let's get rolling. Did you ever throw temper tantrums as a kid? I have to be honest with you. I threw quite a few as a kid. As hard as that might be for some of you to believe, those that have known me for a long time that are listening absolutely can attest to this. I threw quite a few as a kid. How does that relate to Auburn athletics? Well, I'll get into it on today's show. We're introducing a new segment that I will tell you about in just a minute. How is the Auburn fan base feeling right now? Is the Auburn fan base happy? Is the Auburn fan base upset? I'll give my opinion based on the people I've talked to and what I've seen out there from Auburn fans on social media, on message boards over the last week or so. We'll also dive into some possible scenarios for the season. It's the summertime still. This is the first episode of July, although I am recording it on June 30th. By the time you are listening to it, it will be July. So we're getting closer to the season. However, we're still in the summertime, so what are some possible scenarios? We'll go through a good one and we'll go through a bad one. That way you can't accuse me of being an optimist or pessimist. I'm going to give you some of both on today's show. We'll also talk about Tahaad Pettiford. He is back for Auburn this upcoming season, the only returning piece from Auburn's roster last season. What does he need to improve, though? We talked about all the good, but what are areas where Tahaad Pettiford can improve for this Auburn basketball team this upcoming season? And then we will continue our series of summer opponent previews this week, discussing Arkansas. We'll talk about that, and then we'll close out the show discussing Auburn, now a Nike school, no longer an Under Armour school. We'll discuss what that means, as well as talk about some Auburn guys who are having some success and had some big things happen for them in the NBA over the past week as well. So plenty to dive into. As always, I am recording this on my lunch break, so I have to move quick. Going to try to keep this show short and concise. We know how that sometimes goes, however, so I'm not going to waste any more time. Let's get into the show now, starting with a new segment, a new title. I wish I could take credit for this name, but I can't. My brother's a lot more creative than I am, and I'll give a shout out to him for helping me create this topic or coming up with this topic title. I am calling it the Talkin' Tumors Tantrum Meter. So what is the tantrum meter? It is how happy or how upset is the Auburn fan base. So 1 is happy, a 10 is Brian Harsin needs to be fired level, angry and upset. So I'm going to do my best to keep this updated throughout the football season, throughout the basketball season. But right now I'm going to go ahead and start it off on today's show with where I believe the Auburn fan base is at right now. So to give you an update on things, the athletic season is over. So Auburn basketball, Auburn baseball, that's over. Auburn football hasn't started the next athletic year yet. So sitting here right now, there's not much to talk about in regards to sports currently being played because there aren't any for Auburn being played right now. However, a lot of the focus is now on football because the football season is quickly approaching. We are over about 2 months away now from the Auburn football season kicking off. It'll begin on August 29th. So with that being said, here are some things that have kind of dominated the Auburn athletics landscape on social media, on message boards over the last several weeks or week or so if you have not been paying attention. Well, we talked about it on the last couple of shows, actually. Auburn recruiting for football has really been a struggle. Surprisingly to many of us, including me, because Auburn recruiting has been really good during Hugh Freeze's tenure. That has been something that Auburn fans have been able to cling to when everything else has gone poorly on the field. Recruiting is what Auburn fans have pointed to, but well, Hugh Freeze have been bad game management. Hugh Freeze can't get the job done on the field, so forth and so on. Whatever people have said, including Auburn fans, other Auburn fans have said, but recruiting, Auburn's had 2 top 10 classes now, had a top 20 class in the first year that Hugh Freeze came in. Recruiting on the right track, therefore Auburn's going to have success. And I believe there's some validity to that argument. However, as things stand currently, Auburn has the 79th ranked class on 24/7 Sports. Atrocious. Really, really bad. Auburn only has 7 commits. Now, since we last spoke, Auburn did add another commit, added a quarterback commit that was currently committed to Penn State that Auburn flipped, and Peyton Falzone. that came out of the blue. No one knew about it. I had never even heard of the guy. I don't think many Auburn fans had ever heard of him. Quite frankly, I didn't even know Auburn was recruiting him, and I follow recruiting fairly closely. But Auburn did land him, so that did help, give you a little bit of momentum, especially when the wheels seem to be falling off a little bit on the recruiting front. So that was some positive news. But since then, Auburn has continued to miss out on other targets, other top targets on their board, and has left Auburn fans wondering what in the world is going on. I gave some reasons on last week's show. I'm not going to reiterate that because we've already discussed that. If you missed that episode, go back and listen to it, and you can get my thoughts on why maybe Auburn recruiting is struggling right now. Not going to reiterate that. But at the same time that all this is going on, a lot of things are being talked about regarding Hugh Freeze. Of course, his health. We know he has prostate cancer. We know he's going through treatment for that. That's been discussed a little bit, but really the biggest thing that's been discussed as people are trying to figure out reasons for Auburn struggling in recruiting is Hugh Freeze's golfing has been discussed. And if you're not on social media or you're not on message boards, you may not understand what in the world I'm talking about. Well, AL.com put out an article that referenced the amount of times that Hugh Freeze has golfed compared to other SEC head coaches in the month of June. I believe it was up to around 11 times that he has golfed in the month of June. Now, Hugh Freeze is making this public. He doesn't have to make this information public. He is posting his scores to some public forum. I didn't even know this was a thing. I'm not that into golf, but those of you who are, I'm sure know about this. But I didn't know about this until this article was released by AL.com. But Hugh Freeze is releasing his scores to the public, so you can see how many times he has at least publicly announced that he has golfed, and it is 11 times in the month of June. A lot higher of a number than many other SEC coaches that have at least publicly posted their rounds onto this site. Well, that stirred up a lot of angst amongst some Auburn fans because Auburn fans are looking at the way recruiting is going right now, and I think there's a little bit of PTSD when you go back to how poorly Auburn recruited during the Brian Harsin era and how he really did not give much effort into recruiting whatsoever. And that hasn't been the case for Hugh Freeze over his first 2 seasons. Has that changed? I don't know. Is he golfing a lot? It seems so. However, to me, I don't get too worked up about that. The results will ultimately either speak for themselves or they won't. Either you'll have success or you won't. I'm not going to get worked up by how much Hugh Freeze is golfing. It is the dead period currently for recruiting, meaning you can't have recruits on campus. So this is, quote-unquote, the off time for coaches, but we know they never truly get any off time. You're always expected to be recruiting. But the optics of it, I understand. They don't look good. When you have the 79th ranked recruiting class and then you're out golfing every single day, or as people make it out to be, even if it's not, it's not the best look for Hugh Freeze. And we have talked over and over and over again on this show over the last 2 years about how Hugh Freeze is terrible with PR. Absolutely horrendous. We've talked about his press conferences, post-game press conferences a million times, it feels like, and how he hasn't said the right things, or even if he's telling the truth, he shouldn't say it the way he's saying it, or shouldn't say anything at all. So look, we know he's not a PR genius. This is definitely not a great PR move. And because things are not going well, people are going to cling to whatever they can, whatever reasoning they can grasp onto, or if they're mad with you and they're just looking for or if they're just looking for a reason to be mad at you, they're going to look at this golfing and they're going to cling to that, and they're going to fuss about that, and they're going to point to that. That is the reason why Auburn is struggling. I think it's a lot deeper than that, but that's a simple and easy explanation when we don't really know the full explanation of to why Auburn is struggling in recruiting, despite maybe some of our opinions on it. So, suffice to say, I give you all of that context to get to my point here of where is the tantrum meter for Auburn fans right now. I honestly, despite all of that, despite all of the negatives, and I'm giving you the negatives and some of the frustrations that have come from Auburn fans over this past week, I only have the tantrum meter at 4. Now, if you're a diehard, if you follow recruiting closely, if you've been a part of that group that's been attacking Hugh Freeze because he's been on the golf course 11 times at least over the month of June, your meter might be up a little bit closer to 7. But the vast majority, as much as I or you might be a diehard, you might follow Auburn recruiting, you might know every single news that pertains to Auburn athletics as soon as it happens. The vast majority of the Auburn fan base is not on message boards and is not super active on Auburn Twitter. Some of you listening might not even know what Auburn Twitter is. Therein lies my point. So therefore, when you keep the whole Auburn fan base as a whole, it's only a 4 right now because a lot of the Auburn fan base is not even checked in. Now, many of you that are listening to this podcast, I'm going to guess you're probably a diehard as you're listening to this podcast. So you're more dialed in to what is going on. And I certainly appreciate that and am grateful for that, and thank you for listening, choosing to listen to this show. But many other Auburn fans are not listening to this show right now. They're not dialed in, and they'll turn back in come August when Auburn kicks off against Baylor. So when you add those fans in, even if you have a super vocal minority, it still brings your number to 4. So I'm just giving you an idea of how I got to my calculations. Yes, there are some fans that are very frustrated, but there are many that aren't frustrated by anything yet. They'll be frustrated if the season doesn't go how they want it to go. If Auburn doesn't win a lot of games this season, if Auburn struggles yet again, then that's going to elevate it. But right now it's at a 4. Fans are frustrated based on last season. If they are paying a little bit of attention to recruiting, if they happen to see that AL.com article, okay, that may level them up a little bit, but it's still only at a 4 right now. You had a really great Auburn basketball season. You had a really good Auburn baseball season. So, including Auburn athletics as a whole into it, Auburn fans are okay. You know, it was a solid athletic year. Auburn football was really bad, but basketball and baseball had really good years. So that's why I'm putting it at a 4. Again, if you're a diehard, maybe you've got yours up at a 7 or 8. But as an average for the Auburn fan base, I've got the Auburn fan base at a 4 right now on the tantrum meter. But we will continue to update this as we get into the Auburn football season, as I'm sure it could change in a good way or a bad way, depending on how the year goes. Speaking of how the year could go, that transitions nicely into our next segment, which is Summer Scenarios is what I am calling this segment. I'm going to keep it going throughout the rest of the summer. We'll have 2 scenarios on today's episode that I want to get into, one positive and one negative. I like to start with the negative and then get to the positive. So the negative scenario is this. What if Jackson Arnold flops? What if Jackson Arnold is no better than he was at Oklahoma? And what does that mean for Auburn? Is the season lost? That's my first question. If you were to tell me right now, if you could look into the future and you were to say, okay, hey, Carson, I can see into the future Jackson Arnold's not going to be any good. He's going to be a bad quarterback for Auburn. My first question to you would be, well, is the season lost? Meaning, is Auburn going to have another losing season? Is there any hope that Auburn can at least put together a okay season despite Jackson Arnold maybe not panning out? That would be my first question. And if they say yes, then my next question will be, okay, then who stepped up at quarterback? Was it Deuce Knight? Was it Ashton Daniels? Because someone stepped into that role and provided at least some solid quarterback play, or else Auburn would not have been able to survive the season. I think either way, now getting back into not to talking to the prophet, if you will, about how the season's going to go back in the real world here as we sit on June 30th as I'm recording this. If this scenario plays out, I'm really not sure. I think Deuce Knight's going to be the backup quarterback this year for Auburn, so I would assume that he would take over if the situation played out as we are talking about here and Jackson Arnold can't get the job done. But don't count out Ashton Daniels. I've thought more about this as I was thinking over this segment and planning out this segment. Ashton Daniels started at Stanford last season. He has played multiple years of collegiate football. He is behind the 8 ball a little bit because he wasn't here for spring because he was still graduating from Stanford. So if a guy can graduate from Stanford, if he's a veteran quarterback, I believe he's going to be able to pick up on the playbook fairly quickly. It's just going to be about getting reps in, getting comfortable with the wide receivers. So I wouldn't count him out as being able to step in and take over that role if things went sideways with Jackson Arnold this season. But I think either Deuce Knight or Ashton Daniels could still salvage Auburn's season. Would it be a really good season? Absolutely not. Could one of those guys get Auburn to 7 wins? I think they could. But other areas would have to step up. You would have to be really good defensively, which is possible. I think the running game would have to be really solid. The offensive line would need to take the step that we expect it to take. And then your receivers would have to help you out. And you would have to not turn the football over, which certainly could be a big issue with any quarterback, but even more so with a freshman quarterback in Deuce Knight. So it is possible that Auburn could salvage the season with the Deuce Knight or Ashton Daniels, but it also is just as likely that things could completely just go terribly for Auburn this season if Jackson Arnold does not pan out. Ashton Daniels or Deuce Knight, you might have all three end up having to play, and none of the quarterbacks might be the answer for Auburn. That is also a possible scenario this upcoming season, a very bad scenario. And if that does happen, going back to Jackson Arnold not panning out, can Auburn still make a bowl game? Well, if Deuce Knight or Ashton Daniels can get the job done, then yes. If they can't, likely not. What does it mean for Hugh Freeze's job? I'm not one to put a certain number of games on what Hugh Freeze has to win this year to retain his job. I don't know. Only John Cohen, only President Roberts really know the answer to that. Hugh Freeze, of course, we talked about his controversial remarks, I think, back in May when he had the interview and said, well, we've at least got to make a bowl game this year. And that is a factual statement. Auburn absolutely needs to make a bowl game this year. So if he doesn't do that, then I would fully expect him to be fired. But would he maintain his job at 6 wins, at 7 wins, or does Auburn need more from Hugh Freeze in year 3? That I can't answer. If things do not work out with Jackson Arnold, I do think Hugh Freeze's job is going to be in serious, serious jeopardy because I don't see the season going very well if that happens. I think Ashton Daniels or Deuce Knight could provide you something. I'm just not sold that they would be able to get the job done to a level that would warrant retaining Hugh Freeze. But again, I'm not making that decision. I hope we don't have to ever have this conversation again. But it is a possible scenario for this upcoming season, and that's why I wanted to do this segment, because we're in July, and if you're anything like me, your mind is constantly going through possible situations, how this season can go. And there's a million different possibilities, if not more than that, really, if you're to go into the actual math of it. But this is one possibility for Auburn, that Jackson Arnold does not pan out, and that could mean bad things for Auburn and for Hugh Freeze this season. On the flip side, let's go to a positive scenario, because we just did a negative one, so let's do a positive one. How about this scenario? Auburn makes the playoffs if, and then I left ... here on my paper. What will it take for Auburn to make the playoffs? We did this segment last year. In a perfect world, if you're an Auburn fan, Auburn makes the playoffs. I'm not predicting it again. This is just a scenario. This is one of many possible scenarios for Auburn this season. It is possible for Auburn to make the playoffs. Is it likely? No. But it is possible. There is a chance. There is a chance. So what would it take? One, I fully believe it would take Jackson Arnold panning out, unlike our previous scenario. It would take him having a really good season and being better, honestly, than I think many of us expect, maybe even Auburn fans expect. It would take him playing to the level of his high school rating, which was a 5-star quarterback coming out of high school. It would take him playing to that level, and it would take more than just him, though. It would take the offensive line taking a big step. It would take the defense answering some questions that we have for them as far as their depth goes along the defensive line, and some of that young talent taking another step there. It would take Auburn improving on its red zone success, improving on turning the football over. You see, there's a lot of things that Auburn is going to need to do better this upcoming season, but look, Auburn won 5 games last season. Auburn was in nearly every single game they lost. So you take a few of those one-score games that Auburn lost and you flip them on its head, and Auburn's looking at 8 or 9 wins last season, and then you're talking about a team who might be in the playoff race come later in the season. So assuming Auburn takes a little bit of a step forward and maybe they come out on the right side of some of those turnover battles, and that results in winning a few more games, Auburn's going to likely be favored in 8 of their 12 games this season. Now, again, favored is and odds are one thing. We know games aren't played on paper, but let's just for the sake of argument, let's say Auburn wins all 8 games they're favored in. Unlikely to happen, but again, just for the sake of argument, let's say that happens. That means Auburn just needs to win 2 of the 4 games they are not favored in. Auburn will likely not be favored at Texas A&M, at Oklahoma, and then against Georgia and Bama. So can Auburn win one of the road games at Oklahoma or at Texas A&M? It's possible. In this scenario, Auburn's going to have to do that. Can Auburn win at least one of the Georgia and the Alabama games? Those games are both at home. Auburn's still likely to be an underdog, but if Auburn can do that, and then Auburn loses the other one, and they end up at 10-2, Auburn's getting in the playoffs at 10-2. Could Auburn get in the playoffs at 9-3? Last year when I did this segment, I thought absolutely that an SEC team at 9-3 would get into the playoffs. With the 12-team playoff and the auto bids and so forth and so on, that didn't happen. We saw Alabama get left out, Ole Miss, South Carolina, all sitting at 9-3 last season. It's still possible. However, I think it's unlikely that Auburn would be able to get in at 9-3. But at 10-2, absolutely. Now, I don't see a path where Auburn loses to Baylor and then gets in the playoffs. They would really have to go on a tear, would have to probably beat both of Georgia and Alabama, and only drop, another game to Oklahoma or Texas A&M. So the path is very slim there. It's going to be very difficult. Again, I'm not predicting it, but it is possible. There is a scenario for this upcoming season in which Auburn makes the playoffs again. If Jackson Arnold has a big year, if Auburn's defense is really good, if Cam Coleman and Eric Singleton make for a lethal duo like we think they can, if Auburn's offensive line turns out to be one of the better units in the SEC, it's in there. It's in there. So that is a positive scenario for the optimists out there that are listening to this show today, that you want an optimistic take. Well, there's an optimistic scenario for you. Moving on now, transitioning to basketball, let's talk about Tahaad Pettiford. We've spent a lot of time on this show discussing how good Tahaad Pettiford is and how important he was for Auburn to get back, to return for this upcoming season, how he's going to be the focal point of this Auburn team. But we really haven't talked about the negatives. And by negatives, it's not really a bad thing. It's just where does he need to improve as a player to not only help his draft stock for next year, but also to help this Auburn basketball team be as good as they can be this upcoming year. Because if Auburn wants to compete for the SEC championship, if Auburn wants to yet again compete for a national championship, Tahaad Pettiford is going to need to be one of the best players in college basketball, and he is fully capable of doing that, especially if he improves in a few areas. And he's really good in a lot of areas, but if he can take a few steps forward in just a couple different areas that I'm going to discuss here in just a second, he has the chance to be really, really special and to be an All-American this upcoming year. So I'll start out with the first thing I would point to, and I'm sure that as Tahaad Pettiford went through the NBA draft process this past year, that NBA scouts and general managers, front office types pointed out, was his defense. Look, he's a small guy. He's about 6'1", which I was surprised that he came in that tall. But he's still an undersized guard. So defense will always be challenging for someone who is undersized. However, he can improve there. One thing he did do well defensively last year was he averaged about a steal per game. If he can continue to do that, and even with his minutes increase like they're expected to this upcoming season, if he can even improve that number a little bit and to clog up passing lanes even more, that would be a big deal. But physically, taking that next step, having this offseason program where he'll be able to gain weight and muscle, that will help him in just continuing to learn the skills of defending. We know Bruce Pearl and this Auburn staff, Stephen Pearl, are excellent at turning guards into great defenders. Look what Auburn did with Denver Jones. He was a phenomenal scorer, and Auburn turned him to one of the best defenders in college basketball last season. I don't expect Tahaad Pettiford to make that type of leap. I don't expect him to become a Denver Jones level defender. But he can be a disruptor, and he can get better, and he can at least be average. If he can be an average defender, that makes him a much, much better player. He got better. You saw as the season went on. He learned how to become a better defender as he learned under Bruce Pearl on this Auburn staff. And I think with another off season ahead of him, or in the process of going through that now, I think he can really take another step and become a solid defender. And if Auburn can get that out of him on top of his offense, he's going to be a really special player. And you can't ask for much more than that. So no, do I think he can become a Denver Jones level defender? I don't. But can he become a better defender? Absolutely. Number 2, turnovers. Tahaad Pettiford is an extremely aggressive player. He's a bold player. We saw that all year, something that I think Bruce Pearl and I think Auburn fans really love about Tahaad Pettiford. He's cold-blooded. He doesn't get bothered by anything. The moment's not too big for him. However, He averaged 1.5 turnovers per game. That needs to come down. That's too high of a turnover rate. Auburn did not turn the ball over last year much. He did lead the team in turnovers, though. Auburn's going to play at a faster pace, and if he's the point guard, he's likely going to be the one that's going to be turning it over if Auburn does turn the ball over this season. But can he get that rate down? Can he get it to about 1 or so per game? Denver Jones had some games in there where he struggled, especially early in the year where he turned it over a lot. As he got more comfortable, those numbers went down. So Tahaad Pettiford needs to focus on getting that number as low as he can this upcoming season. Although I will admit it might be challenging if he's playing 30 to 35 minutes per game and Auburn's playing at a faster pace. That typically leads to more turnovers. But if he can improve that, that will be good for Auburn this upcoming season. And then number 3, consistency. Tahaad Pettiford had 22 games last season where he scored in double digits. That's a lot. That's really, really impressive, especially for a true freshman. However, he also had 6 games where he scored 5 or less points. He had 0 points in his season opener, his debut, if you will, for Auburn against Vermont. If you want to throw that one out, that's fine. He had a stretch with Arkansas, Georgia, and Ole Miss towards the back half of the regular season where he went 4 points, 2 points, 4 points. He had 0 points versus Tennessee in the SEC tournament game when Auburn was eliminated. However, and just to add this note, Auburn did go 5-1 in those games. Surprisingly, the only game that Auburn lost where Tahaad Pettiford scored in less than 5 points was that Tennessee game. But I'd be willing to wager, and I don't bet, but if I did, I'd be willing to wager Auburn's not going to be 5-1 in games next season that Tahaad Pettiford scores less than 5 points. He's going to be too massive of a piece for Auburn next season. He's Auburn's star player. You can't have your star player scoring 5 or less points and expect to win. That just cannot happen. So Auburn needs more consistency from him. He has some really poor shooting games. Look, shooting's going to come and go. And with Tahaad Pettiford, the trend that you'll notice if you go back like I did and dive into his stats from last season, you'll notice that the games where he scored in single digits, where he scored less than 5 points, it was games where he was 0 from 3 or just made 1 3. He needs to get better at being able to score even when his shot's not falling. I do believe he'll take that step. He has the ability to get to the basket. He showed off his floater in the NCAA tournament. He developed that, and that really came along during the season last year. So adding those tools to his repertoire, continuing to improve on those skills will be very important because Auburn cannot have Tahaad Pettiford going out and putting up 0 and 2 and 4, 5 or less points in games and expect to win next season. He's going to be too important of a piece. So even when his shots are not falling, he needs to be able to score, and he needs to find a way to be a little bit more consistent. Again, we are nitpicking. He had, like I said, 22 games where he scored in double digits. So that was still the majority of the season. But he needs to try to lessen his poor games to as few as he can. Everyone's going to have duds of games from from time to time. That's part of it. We know that. Even the best, greatest of all time, Michael Jordan, LeBron James, they have duds of games. It happens. Limiting those and then trying to make something out of nothing when your shots aren't falling, still finding ways to get to the free throw line, still finding ways to put up double digits even if you aren't shooting well, that's the mark of a truly great player, and I fully believe Tahaad Pettiford is capable of that this upcoming season, and I look forward to seeing him make those improvements. Okay, continuing on now to Arkansas. The Arkansas preview, that is who we're discussing this week on our summer opponent preview. Auburn will face Arkansas after the Missouri game, I believe it is. We're getting into the back half of the season now. This is game 8, I believe, of the year for Auburn. Auburn travels to Fayetteville for this one. Arkansas beat Auburn last season. Oh boy, that game. Hank Brown started that game. You remember, this was early in the year. Peyton Thorne has struggled in the Cal game. Auburn ends up starting Hank Brown. Hank Brown throws 3 interceptions in the first half. It was a disaster. Peyton Thorne actually came in the second half of that Arkansas game and played fairly well, but couldn't overcome the 3 turnovers in the first half. Auburn lost this game 24-14. I remember talking about it after. Had Peyton Thorne started, that game against Arkansas and played the way he did in the second half. In the first half, Auburn likely wins that game. But again, hindsight's 2020. Many people wanted Hank Brown to start that game because of the way Peyton Thorne had played in the Cal game. So I think most people would have done what Hugh Freeze did, and that was play Hank Brown, but it didn't go well. The past is in the past now, though, and we move forward to 2025. Arkansas went 7-6 last year, which for the Razorbacks is a solid year. Sam Pittman, for most of the season, people thought he was going to be out of a job, that last season would be his last, whether that was him retiring or getting fired. That did not happen. He was able to salvage his job, but he also enters this year probably on the hot seat once again. He is 30-31 in his 5 seasons at Arkansas. He's entering year 6. He had hip surgery this offseason. He says he's feeling better than ever and is ready for this year. But I'm not super high on Arkansas. I think they're going to be one of the worst teams in the SEC this season. They had the 32nd ranked recruiting class in high school recruiting this past cycle. They had an okay transfer portal class, 16th ranked portal class. However, the bright spot for the Razorbacks is their quarterback. Their quarterback is Talkin Green, who could be one of the better QBs in the league this upcoming season. He's played a lot of college football, first at Boise State. Now this will be his second year at Arkansas. He threw for over 3,000 yards last season, 15 touchdowns, but he did throw 9 interceptions. He's also a gifted athlete, 602 yards rushing and 8 touchdowns. He is who Arkansas will cling to. He's going to have to be the savior for this team this season. They are going to rely on him heavily to try to cover up some other holes in this roster. They have 4 transfer wide receivers, though. That's a lot of new faces at wide receiver for Talkin Green to develop relationships with and get comfortable with. They also have 3 transfer offensive linemen. At least 2 of those guys are likely to start. Their offensive line was not good last year, and Sam Pittman is an former offensive line coach. Again, it's never a good look when your strength, what should be your strength, is the weakness as a coach. It's the weakness of your team. That's why I have a hard time with offensive coaches having bad offenses. And Sam Pittman being an offensive line coach, having a bad offensive line, it just doesn't jive. It doesn't make sense, yet that's been the case for Arkansas. We'll see if that improves this year. On the defensive side, not as many transfers. A couple of transfers slated to start, including former Auburn player Caleb Wooden. He is expected to start, transferred out of Auburn to Arkansas. But they return a lot of players, a lot of veteran players. Of course, Travis Williams, the defense coordinator there, former Auburn coach and player, he is still there. He had opportunities to go elsewhere. Other teams looked at possibly hiring him as their defense coordinator. He's done a good job there. But he ended up staying at Arkansas. That was a big win for the Razorbacks to be able to hold on to him. I actually believe their defense could be the strength of this team this season. But Bobby Petrino is also a formidable offensive coordinator. Been around for a long time, a veteran, and he's always able to get the best out of his offenses, and I believe he will once again get the best out of Talkin Green. That's what makes Arkansas such an odd team this year. I think their coaching staff is actually really solid, with Travis Williams as the defense coordinator and Bobby Petrino as the OC. The problem and the reason I doubt Arkansas is because of the talent on the roster as a whole. I think Talkin Green's a good player, but besides him, I just have doubts about their offense. And that's why I think Arkansas is going to struggle this year in what is a really good SEC. They played Notre Dame early in the season, so we'll have a pretty good idea of the type of team they are by the time Auburn faces off with them. This is an early kickoff. It will be between 11 a.m. Central and 12 or noon Central time in Fayetteville. If you are the road team, I do believe in this. You prefer for a kickoff to be early. It typically benefits the road team. Auburn only has 2 early kicks this upcoming season, and one of those is on the road, and is this game against Arkansas. I do think the early kick will benefit Auburn here. Again, like I said last week with the Missouri game at home, this game, even though it is on the road for Auburn, is not a game Auburn should lose or expect to lose. This is a game Auburn absolutely should expect to win. And if Auburn wants to have the season it thinks it's capable of having, and Auburn fans want Auburn to have this season, Auburn has to win this football game against Arkansas. You cannot go to Fayetteville and lose this game and expect to have a good season. It's just not possible. So Auburn needs to get the job done against Arkansas in this game. Okay, continuing on now. We've been keeping a pretty good pace. I was hoping we would. And we have, well, really 2 more quick segments before we close out today's show. One, I wanted to congratulate and address the Auburn players in the NBA. So the NBA draft took place last week, and Johni Broome was drafted in the early second round to the Philadelphia 76ers. The Philadelphia 76ers. Super excited for Johni Broome. This is awesome. Excited for him and his potential to play there and be a contributor there for the 76ers. Not going to bore you with NBA talk. That's not what the show is. But I know many of you are invested in the Auburn basketball players from this past season and would like to know if you aren't on social media, if you haven't seen it on the news. So that's why I wanted to give you an update. So he is headed to Philadelphia to play for the 76ers. And I also like the connection, the fact that Charles Barkley played for the 76ers as well. So that's 2 of the greatest players in Auburn basketball history that have played for the same NBA franchise, which I think is a pretty neat connection there. So I like that as well. So super excited for Johni Broome and wish him the best. Dylan Cardwell signed with the Sacramento Kings to a 2-way contract, meaning he can play in both the NBA and the NBA G League. I certainly hope that he can find a way onto an NBA court at some point. We know he's immensely gifted, athletically talented guy. We know his offensive skills aren't the best, though, and that can limit him some. But we also know he's an extremely hard worker, and he will do everything he can to be the best player he can be for the Sacramento Kings and their organization. So I hope that he's able to stay on with them and find success there. We'll definitely be looking forward to watching him in the Summer League. And then Miles Kelly, he was signed by the Dallas Mavericks to the same contract that Dylan Cardwell was, the 2-way contract for G League and the NBA. Miles Kelly, his shooting, that will be the key for him. He's a really good shooter. I know he went cold in the NCAA tournament, but overall, he's a very good shooter. If he can find a way to shoot really well in the NBA and in the G League, he might find himself on an NBA court at some point in his career as well. He's a pretty solid defender, as we saw at Auburn. So hopefully he can find a way there. Chaney Johnson signed a Summer League, essentially, contract, the best way to explain it, with the Cleveland Cavaliers. So I wish him the best, and congratulations to Chaney. Super happy for him. Another extremely hard worker, a guy that was my favorite player on this Auburn basketball team last season. Could not be happier for him and his success that he's getting this opportunity. For whatever reason, Denver Jones has yet to sign a contract, at least as of the time of this recording on Monday, June 30th. Maybe by the time you're listening, he has. I don't understand it. I don't know if Denver Jones will ever be an NBA player, but for him not to even get a contract, not even get a Summer League invite like Chaney Johnson, that is quite baffling to me. I am very surprised by that. I think he's deserving of at least getting that, and I sincerely hope he does get that sooner rather than later. But those are the Auburn players from last year's team that are in the NBA or in the G League or going through some sort of process for the NBA. And I wanted to give you all an update on that if you had not heard or seen that. And then for another former Auburn player, Jabari Smith, he just signed a 5-year, $122 million extension with the Houston Rockets. So super excited for Jabari. I know there were some that doubted whether or not he would have success in the NBA, whether or not he would be a bust. He hasn't been. And I think with this new contract and with the way the Houston Rockets roster, without going into too many details to bore you if you're not interested, but the way that roster's shaking out, I fully believe Jabari Smith's going to have a bigger role, and his stock is only going to continue to climb. So super excited for Jabari Smith, and that is great news for Auburn. Whenever Auburn can advertise putting players in the league, that only helps recruiting, and it continues to speak to the success of this Auburn basketball program under Bruce Pearl. Okay, to close out the show, let's address the big news for the month of July for Auburn athletics, and that is the transition to Nike. Auburn has been with Under Armour and its apparel partner for nearly my entire life. The Under Armour-Auburn partnership started in 2006. I was born in 2003. Before then, it was Russell, which, funny enough, the Auburn Baseball Super Regionals a few weeks ago, there was a guy standing in front of me and my friends in an Auburn Russell gear polo, which I couldn't help but chuckle because I was thinking if that guy's still wearing that now, he's definitely going to still be wearing that even when Auburn transitions to Nike. And I hope he does. Keep wearing that shirt, my friend. Keep wearing it. I absolutely love it. I'm sure that's his favorite shirt. It's probably his good luck shirt that he's probably worn since 2003 and 2004 when Auburn had the undefeated season. Probably wore it in the 2010 national championship season. So I hope he keeps wearing that shirt. But Russell will now be 2 brands behind of where Auburn is now, which is with Nike. Look, Under Armour, the partnership has had its up and downs. If you want to know all the details on it, I'm not the guy for you. Go to Auburn Uniform Database. Clint Richardson, who runs that, does a fantastic job. He can give you more info than you may ever want to know or need to know on Auburn uniforms and explain the whole history of Auburn and Under Armour. But this partnership has been going on for a long time. Auburn went out on a limb when they went with Under Armour back 16 years ago or 18 years ago, however many years ago it was now. And they went with Under Armour when everyone else was still with Russell at that point or Adidas or Nike. And Auburn was Under Armour's premier brand. It was Under Armour's premier brand for many, many years. Eventually, Under Armour would add Wisconsin and would add Notre Dame was a big one for them and Maryland, of course. But Auburn was the marquee brand for Under Armour for many years, and that was one of the reasons that I think many Auburn fans, including myself, liked that Auburn was Under Armour, because it made Auburn unique. And if anything, everyone wants to feel special and wants to feel unique, so I liked that Auburn was different from everyone else. Auburn wasn't with Nike and wasn't with Adidas. But as time went on, Under Armour stock fell a little bit, figuratively and literally. And it was time. Auburn needed to make the move to Nike, even if it meant being like some of the other schools. It was what was in the best interest for the athletes, and that's what ultimately matters the most. It doesn't matter, and I think many fans wanted Nike as well, but what ultimately matters is the athletes and what they need and what's best for them, and I do believe Nike is best for them from an equipment standpoint and from a gear standpoint. I do believe that's what the players wanted. They think it'll be better for them, especially with the cleats and shoes. I think will certainly be better for these Auburn players in their sports. So this move needed to be made. And from the standpoint of 2 of your most famous alumni in Charles Barkley and Bo Jackson are both Nike athletes, and they were unable to wear Auburn gear, or at least Auburn Under Armour gear, because of their dealings with Nike. And while that's not the biggest deal in the world, and why that doesn't necessarily need to be the breaking point for you and the deciding factor for you when you make a deal with an apparel company, it certainly doesn't hurt. And now that Bo Jackson and Charles Barkley will be able to wear Auburn team gear is a big deal to me, and I think it does matter. It is cool to see those guys in Auburn gear again. I'm excited to see them be able to do that again or maybe for the first time since they were really players. So that is a big deal, and if Auburn can market, use them in advertisement. If Auburn's able to make some Bo Jackson gear, something similar to the Jordan gear using Nike, I don't know if that will happen. I know some Auburn fans are certainly hopeful for that. I think that would be really cool if that were to occur. Those are ideas that now can legitimately be discussed that couldn't be discussed while Auburn was still under Armour. So I think this is a net positive for Auburn athletics, even if you personally maybe liked Auburn's Under Armour gear, which I did. I've liked Auburn's Under Armour polos. I have plenty of those that I like to wear, and I'm still going to wear them, honestly. I don't think that – I know some people will just stop wearing all their Auburn Under Armour stuff. Eventually it will phase out as it did with Russell, and you won't see except 20 years down the road, you might see an old dude, and that old dude might be me still wearing an Under Armour polo, Auburn polo that I decided I liked. But you get my drift there. It'll be up to each fan what they want to do. You don't have to stop wearing the Auburn Under Armour gear just because Auburn is with Nike. But I know some fans will and some won't. But I think overall, this is a net positive for Auburn athletics, and I look forward to seeing what Nike brings for Auburn and all of Auburn sports, because you'll have new uniforms for everything because it's a new apparel company. What I will say is I don't expect much change or any change in Auburn football uniforms. They've been the same essentially since the beginning of time. I know Clint Richardson, the AU uniform guy, would disagree with that. But I'm just talking about in general. I'm not talking about the specific details. I know those have changed over the years. But for the most part, we know the navy jersey and the white pants and the stripes, all that's going to look the same, whether you're Under Armour or Nike. So I don't expect many changes there. I don't expect Auburn to debut an orange jersey because Auburn's switching to Nike or anything like that. As for some of the other sports, of course, baseball and softball and basketball, that is where you could see some bigger changes because you can do more with those. You're still going to stick to, obviously, your three colors with white, navy, and orange, but you can do some different designs there. You're not as limited and locked into certain designs as you are with the football uniform, so I will be interested to see what those look like. I don't think we're going to get those immediately. Probably won't know what those are going to look like till we get to those seasons, when we get to the Auburn basketball season and Auburn baseball season. Maybe I'll be wrong. Maybe they'll release those sooner than I expect, but that would be my guess. But overall, I'm excited about Nike. I appreciated Under Armour and enjoyed them being Auburn's sponsor. But hey, much as I might dislike change at times, I think this change is for the good, and it'll be good for Auburn athletics. Well, that is going to wrap us up for today's show. Thank you so much for listening, whether you're listening on podcast or watching on YouTube. If you haven't already, I'd ask you please subscribe to the show and give it a like as well if you're watching on YouTube. Again, I really appreciate your support and giving this show a listen, and share it with your friends if you haven't already. If you think they would enjoy it, I would appreciate that as well. And I hope everyone has a happy 4th of July weekend, depending on whenever you're listening to the show. Maybe you're listening to it over the 4th of July, but we will be back next week with another edition of Talkin' Tumors. Thank you for listening to Talkin' Tumors. If you liked what you heard, make sure to subscribe and follow @Talkin' Tumors on social media so you'll never miss an episode. War Eagle.